Future Grandmasters, welcome back. Today I played a game on Lichess which I thought I lost on time, but the story was something else. I had white pieces. It was 3 plus 0 game. I played at d4. My opponent played d5, knight to f3, knight to f6, e4, and bishop to g4, pinning the knight to the queen. Bishop to d3, knight to c6, and pawn to c3. e6, and I develop my knight to d2, bishop to d6, and queen to c2. So my queen is not pinned now, and here my opponent castle, I castled, and my opponent played g6. So I attacked his bishop. Here he should capture the knight, but instead of that he went to h5, and that is just a mistake because I can just attack his bishop, which is kind of trapped. So here he gave up his knight. I took his knight and he took the pawns. So he won 2 pawns, but I gained a knight. So I gained material here. I moved my king forward, and my opponent just took the bishop. I took back with the knight. My opponent should push the pawn here, but instead of that, he put his queen on f6. I put my rook on an open file. I cannot move my king right now because the knight will be hanging, but here after uh, my opponent pushed a pawn, I took back, he took with the knight, I took back, and then he took with the queen. Now I can move, and so I moved to f1. My opponent played c5. He is trying to attack my bishop, and here I made a mistake. I just pushed a pawn, and here he attacked my bishop. I moved my bishop, and when he took back, the pawn on c4 is hanging, so I took the pawn. Now the pawn on f7 is pinned, which I didn't notice, and after my opponent attacked my bishop, I put my bishop on b3. My opponent wanted to unpin his king, so he just moved his king, and here I saw that the queen and king are on the same diagonal, so I just developed my bishop, and I was hoping to win the queen here, but I failed to realize that my queen was also uh, on the same file as of the black rook. So when he took, I took his queen, and he also took my queen. Here I gained some material, but my plan was kind of failed. After this, my opponent attacked the bishop. I just moved the bishop, uh, and then I started making my king active. Here I offered the trade of the rooks. My opponent declined, attacking the pawn. I pushed the pawn forward, and my opponent clearly knew his plan, and he started pushing his pawn. And I failed to realize what was his plan because he just pushed his pawn, attacking my bishop. And when I moved my bishop, he took the pawn because the pawn was undefended now. Then I attacked the pawn on s7. He first gave me a check, and I moved my king upward to e3. Now he cannot take the bishop right now because it is protected by the rook. But I am still attacking the pawn on s7, so he moved his pawn, and now I should offer him a rook trade, but I also failed to find the move here, and so instead I made a blunder here by attacking the pawn on b5. Now my opponent can take the bishop here, and I am still winning, but I don't think I can convert that game into a winning position. Here my opponent didn't take the bishop, he just protected the pawn, and I was kind of happy because uh, I didn't lose material. So I offered the trade of the rooks. My opponent gave a check. I moved my king to a2, and here my opponent traded the rooks. Here if I capture back with the king, then I am going to lose pawn on f2. So I captured back with the bishop, and now I am still attacking the pawn on b b6. So my opponent pushed it, but he forgot that the pawn on a4 is hanging, so I took that. My opponent moved his bishop to f8. I am not going to pin his bishop to his king because uh, I thought the pawn on g6 was hanging, but before that I pushed the pawn and secured my bishop, and after that I attacked the pawn on g6. My opponent protected the pawn. Here I should just attack the pawn again because it is only protected once, but I just wanted to keep my king active, and in this position I just have 5 seconds and I should be moving pieces fast. Then my opponent moved his bishop. I kept going forward. My opponent stopped me from entering, and so I just moved my bishop, attacking the pawn twice. And now, as you can see, it is 1.7 seconds on the clock, and my opponent should give a check here so that I have to move, but my opponent instead just gave up his bishop. I took, and now it is 0.3 seconds on the clock. I pre-moved, catching the pawn, and once my opponent moved, I just wanted to move my rook, and so that I can keep moving my pieces. But when I moved my rook, the game kind of ended. So I thought I lost on time, but in reality, it was checkmate. I gained some points, so I looked up and it said checkmate. White won by checkmate. So I was curious what happened here, and I saw that he made a wrong move here. If he had just went to h7, then it was different position, but he moved to h5 and it was checkmate in one.